Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space, your sci-fi movie review podcast. I'm Scott Weatherly, one of your regular hosts, and as usual, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesomely because I'm about to talk about Starship Troopers.
Indeed,
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to talking about this film. I'd forgotten how much fun this film was, and also how sort of darkly satirical it was.
Yeah,
think
I had
it's
this. I had the same response. I thought I sort of remember not being sure that I liked it the first time I saw it. At least through most of it. And I'm always kind of trying to reconstruct how I sort of saw it for the first time. And I think the first time, all of the sort of campy elements, the 90210 sort of dynamic, some of the bad dialogue, the coincidences, and then that it didn't have a proper ending, all of these things kind of irritated me. Although I was still charmed by a lot of it. And I'm like you, I'm a sucker for the RoboCop-esque sort of fake advertisements and TV programs that are in universe. But ever since then, I've been the biggest fan of this movie. And like you, I'm just charmed through so much of it. I'm just delighted.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this came out in 1997, so I was sort of in my sort of mid-teens by that point, and I remember seeing this. And the first time I see it, like, it was just sort of a kick-ass, gory, sci-fi adventure. That's how I saw it, and thought, "Oh, this is really good fun. It's really silly." Yeah, but as you say, when you come back and watch this, it's as an adult, it's definitely got that sort of. It's a thematic sequel to RoboCop. This is really like Paul Verhoeven going back to that sort of well, and I think we'll definitely get into that. I'll give a quick overview so everyone sort of knows exactly what we're talking about. So, as you say, we're talking about Starship Troopers from 1997, directed by Paul Verhoeven, written by Edward Newmere, based on the book by Robert Heinlein, and starring Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Dina Meyer, Jake Busey, Neil Patrick Harris, Clancy Brown, Patrick Muldoon, Michael Ironside. So it's got a really sort of surprisingly stellar cast in there as a B movie. The plot. In a future world, you can either be a citizen or a civilian. To be a citizen is to commit to military service. This gives you the right to vote and other privileges. Young Jock, Johnny Rico, decides to join up and do his time in the infantry. During his training, the Earth is attacked by an alien bombardment and war is declared. These aliens are bugs, and Johnny and his friends are going to take the fight to them. Want to know more? Okay, so let's sort of get into this. First thing first, the big thing actually on this is this sort of, before we even get to the bugs and the war, this future world fascinates me. And I think it's so subtly, I almost want to say, not anti-American, is it anti-American, I think? Something like that. In that it's set in Buenos Aires, which is, incredibly South America.
Yeah.
But everyone's incredibly American. As you said, sort of like 90210 perfect.
Yeah, I mean,
which I feel is
love,
intentional.
Oh, I do too. And I mean, I love the fact that it's set in Buenos Aires in the beginning, but you don't really know that.
No.
It's kind of like half an hour in or something. It's really when Buenos Aires is destroyed for sure that you're like, oh, Buenos Aires is gone. And it's like, you are all the whitest, most American kids ever. There's no indication that this is Buenos Aires. and maybe that's a kind of like, and I love that it's set in South America. That's amazing, but I don't know if that's like a sort of the McDonald'sification of sort of cultural imperialism that in the future America has just dominated everyhere and everything just feels like Beverly Hills.
That's sort of how I've taken it. I almost took it as almost like American colonialism. Because
Hmm.
it's funny, in the book, I actually I had to go and check this. But in the book, it's not Johnny Rico, it's Juan Rico.
Hmm.
So, although because it is set in Buenos Aires, or they come from Buenos Aires in the book, but he is Hispanic. Um, so I don't know if that's almost like a subtle like kickback from Paul Verhoeven, where maybe a producer or some of the studio gave him notes and was like, no,
Yeah.
we need someone, as you say, like 90210 perfect. But he's kept it in Buenos Aires, and it's sort of like, oh, okay. And Denise Richards lives there. Oh, fair enough. But yeah, I just find that really interesting that it's sort of like you say, like Michael Ironside's working as a teacher down there. It's got all these sort of like, Neil Patrick Harris, as you say, is like the whitest person like possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and the guy who plays Johnny Rico is, also just like such a movie star looking guy.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he is as square jawed as they come, isn't he? Like, square jawed, blonde hair. Um, like I feel like because of this is obviously based around this idea of propaganda. Like Johnny
Mhm,
Rico is almost like Johnny Soldier, isn't he? He's that
mhm.
perfect sort of thing. Like and that must be intentional.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think before we go on, we should point out that the the novel by Robert Heinlein, which won lots of awards and whatnot, incredibly influential. Um, sort of inspired, one of my favorite sci-fi novels, which The Forever War, as a kind of answer to it. Um, but the novel is absolutely a fascist novel. In the
Mm.
novel, this is not a parody. This is not a satire, RoboCop style. That's all Verhoeven, right? The
Yeah.
novel is filled with like 30-page passages in which, his teacher in school is just lecturing about what it means to be a citizen. You get like a little bit of that in the first act of the movie, but that is just dead on. It's kind of like the closest you come in sci-fi to like I mean, I guess Atlas Shrugged is sci-fi technically, but it's like the closest you get in a serious sci-fi novel to those kinds of like long rants in Atlas Shrugged, where it's like, I
Mm.
get it, Ayn Rand, this is really what you believe for 60 pages,
Yeah.
um and Heinlein, I mean, he really believed that, and it was inspired by Vietnam, but it was basically pro-Vietnam.
Yeah, it's weird because again, like you say, I'd I'd be interested to see Heinlein's opinion. If he was to ever see, I don't know if he's when did he die before or after this film? Is he still alive? I don't know. Actually, should have checked that. Um,
I think he's
because you
dead.
can read
Yeah, he
you
died in
can read.
'88.
Oh, there you go. So we never. I'd love to see his opinion of this film because you can take that reading from this film. If you were to read it just dead straight, that utopia or not utopia, that dystopia, that future world is the world he creates. I mean, um, uh, what's it? Ironside. Michael Ironside's character as the teacher, like he does give some of that speech, doesn't he, about what it
Hmm.
is to be a citizen, and that thing of defending the right and having this, the respect and everything to be able to vote and blah blah. It's all in there. And if you take it dead straight, like you go, oh my god, it's quite a right wing sort of set up, this whole sort of society. However, when it's being delivered by Michael Ironside
Hmm.
in that sort of way, it comes across in that sort of tongue in cheek, sort of like not overly camp, but it's got that camp feel, hasn't it? That is obviously pure Verhoeven.
Yeah, but I think that as the movie goes on, that is thoroughly deconstructed. I don't think you can get to
Mm.
the end of this and still think that you're supposed to side with the Michael Ironside character. There's just so much where, I mean, you learn that Rico and his squad have been sent on a suicide mission and they weren't told. I mean, even as he's signing up, you have the recruitment guy who's
Yeah.
missing
Yeah.
both legs and one arm, and he says, and it's a great moment, but it can't be, but a great moment where he says, the infantry made me the man I am today,
Yeah.
and Rico just kind of takes a step back and is like, what the hell have I signed up for? I mean,
Yeah.
there's no way of seeing that stuff and thinking, oh yeah, I'm supposed to buy this whole fascist citizens just spiel.
But I do like the way they drop things in, though. Like, because again, it's sort of the Paul Verhoeven has this great way of world building that you get. He shows doesn't, he shows don't tell. I mean, there's no one who sort of, there's no exposition dump, I suppose, of everyone sort of saying, and this is how the world works, and this is it, and this is it. Like, it's just told in drips and pieces. Like, so you learn quite early on that in order to vote, you have to be a citizen. In order to be a citizen, you have to have done military service. So both Johnny Rico's parents are civilians, and you get that, and they obviously live quite comfortably, but they don't get the right to vote. And then later on, there's a couple of other things. Like there's a shower scene later on where they're all talking about what they want to do after service.
Yes.
And someone says about, okay, well, I want to go into politics. It's easier if you've got a citizen. Someone else says, says you can only go into politics if you're a citizen. Someone else says about, I want to have children. It's easier if you've, to get a license if you're a citizen. And then there's all these little drips, there's all these little bits and pieces, and you're thinking, my God, like this world's like crazy. There's some like amazing sort of just little bits of information dripped in throughout the film. And then you obviously get the commercials as well. Yeah, I love it.
I love that.
And I just think that's where Verhoeven really succeeds in this, because obviously you get the return of the commercials as well.
Well, I mean, maybe we could talk about the structure a little, because one of the things that fascinates me, I'm a kind of structuralist. I sort of outline and dissect things in that way. And one of the things that I love, I mean, there are a lot of things that I love about this movie, but one of the things that I really love is how much it goes off the rails. And I really love, because I'm kind of a structure guy, I mean, I can't stand when movies are poorly structured and don't know what they're doing. But I'm also like really delighted by screwing with structure. So like I love From Dusk Till Dawn, right? Where, you get halfway through and it's like, yeah, we've been a really good serial killer movie. Yeah, but we're going another way. And then characters just start dying. This has some of that, where like the first act is high school. And I mean, I think that's the weakest portion, but that's sort of like very Beverly Hills 90210. It's still got some good stuff, and then act 2 is like training, and it's like the Full Metal Jacket sci-fi version, and then act 3 is like the landing on Klandathu. Like, this should be the climax. You have landed on the bugs' planet. You're going to destroy them once and for all. Here's the climax. And that kind of like ends with Rico killed and the total failure of the military mission. And then there's this fourth act as they're doing, island hopping. It's kind of, I've always seen it as a, the island hopping thing in the Pacific. Rajek's killed, and they're just on this planet P. And, then there's this fifth act where, it's like, we're going back to P. And they never go back to Klandathu. Like, and by the end of it, all of the characters have been on this, an arc. Half of them are dead, or certainly, a decent amount. And you feel like, where has this gone? This has not followed the traditional storytelling. It's got no resolution. But except for the space between that fourth and fifth act, every act, because you're going into the big climax, but every act is separated by one of the TV sequences. And it starts with one as well, and then you kind of catch up with it halfway through the movie. So you start with one, and then you have this like nice pause between each act as Verhoeven, it's like, I mean, it's like, I like how, Tarantino sometimes goes to a a black screen and you see like Act 2, Don McHugh's got a secret, and it's just this nice kind of pause to say we're going into this new section. And Verhoeven uses those TV sequences to give you that pause, except for between the fourth and fifth act. But I love the way it's structured in this bizarre way. I mean, it's almost like, it's a kind of classic 5-act structure, but doesn't go where it's supposed to, and intersperses these TV sequences almost as act breaks.
Well, I do. To get to the other, I never thought about the 5-act structure, but you're completely right. And I love the fact that those commercials as well, they sort of, like you say, they're a breather, but they give you information for the next act. They're sort of like, oh, and just so you know, here's some information you're going to need to know. Because you do get the thing of what sort of things I'm thinking. You need to get to you get an advert about being psychic. Are you psychic? Do you have these feelings? Have should you be applying to the military for testing, that sort of thing? Which I think is great because that's obviously gets called back because that's what Neil Patrick Harris's character is. He works in basically sort of like secret, like sort of secret military police and secret research. And then you get the information about how to kill the bugs, which is actually from Neil Patrick Harris, when he's in the military. He's like, you can shoot them, but they're about 87% still lethal, so you've got to go for the brainstem. And that's when they go to Clondathu, and you've got, they're all trying to do that. And then you get this sort of the supreme military leader who basically, after the Clondathu, balls up, he has to step down, and you get the new person, right? And here's the new strategy. And that sort of, like I say, fills up the last 2 acts. So yeah, I just love the fact they keep dropping these little bits and pieces in. But then you get the propaganda pieces as well about, which I think must be before the training, when you got sort of like the soldiers are all lined up, and it's sort of like, I'm doing my bit, I'm doing my bit, and then that little kid's head comes out, and it's sort of like everyone laughs at him. It's brilliant. I think it's so good.
Oh, yeah.
But I also love the fact about those is that in RoboCop, when they're done as commercials. They are done as they sell. There's a board game called Nukem, and you've got the SC or the S whatever it is, SX6000, the car, and all these things come back and they're fantastic. But this one is actually told as almost like online. It's an online news system. It's almost like a state news thing because you constantly get that piece of that. The question: do you want to know more? And there's actually a mouse on the screen. You get to see a cursor, and it's like, do you want to know more? Press here. So it's almost like you are looking at a computer screen, which I think is fantastic because again, it's almost predicting that 24-hour news cycle and having news just beamed at you constantly. Here's information. Here's information. Here's information. So I think Verhoeven was sort of looking forward to that one, which I just think is so clever.
And I think that so much of this, we were talking about the Michael Ironside character in the beginning, and his speech. He comes back, but so much of this has this layer of like a guide to recognizing fascism. Okay. Now, I mean, I'm an American, so I live in an openly fascist country at this point. But not joking. But like you have so many sequences in this that you were talking about the predictive nature of this film that people should have to watch this film and sort of recognize, when you have the kid stomping the cockroaches, which is a brilliant little thing. I love these kids. It's like these cockroaches are unrelated to the intelligent space bugs that we're at war with. But it reminds me of under George W. Bush of Americans pouring French wine in the gutters, in protest because France wasn't down with invading Iraq. And we renamed, I remember being in restaurants that, had renamed French fries Freedom Fries, as if like the French are like, we're very upset that you purchased our wine and disposed of it in such a crude way. You know,
Yeah.
what were you accomplishing? This was so stupid, and yet it has that same sort of like, oh, this feels good. We're stomping cockroaches. You know, let's film this and make this patriotic display that's
Well, it was the
meaningless.
same.
It's so
It was
meaningless.
it was the same thing recently when you get the I can never remember his name, but the black American football player that took a knee, and there
Mm,
was a whole thing then, and obviously
Kaepernick.
that's it, Kaepernick, and then Nike backed him up,
Hmm.
and sort of that sort of thing. So no, we're not going to drop his sponsorship. We're going to back him up on this. And then you get the videos of people like burning their Nike trainers and burning all this
Hmm.
other sort of like Nike merchandise and the Kaepernick tops, and you sort of think, I don't think Nike are going to be too worried because you still paid. You still paid for it, and it's just it's the same ridiculousness, isn't it? That lunacy of sort of like, what I don't know what you think you're achieving by doing this. Um, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
it,
And I
and
see
I
the
think
same, like we have, why the fuck do we play the national anthem at a football game? What the hell does this have to do with anything? But I mean, honestly, I haven't, except for briefly after 9/11, I haven't stood for the national anthem since I was a teenager. Um, and because I don't, it's creepy and fascist, and
mm,
it's compulsory, and people stand, and so I'll sit and be stared at, and but I am not going to stand and pledge my allegiance on command, um, but it has nothing to do with this. And so I mean, I've been to concerts where they play the national anthem beforehand. It's like, um, what is going on here? This is really
mm.
creepy. This is really fascistic. This should set off warning lights. And then it's like almost a parody. Everybody says, you served. Well, thank you for your service. I'm glad that it's nice that somebody serves, right? But how about you tell me what you did, okay? Because there are a lot of people who did not do anything useful, okay? If
Yeah.
if what you did was kill some kids in Iraq, I'm not too happy. No, there were a lot of people who built houses and schools and did great work in Iraq too, even if it was dumb that we were there. Those people aren't bad, but we have this like way in which we lionize soldiers, and yet we treat soldiers like crap. They don't,
Mm.
they don't have health care. They don't have, proper vet services. They have PTSD that they can't get treatment for, and they wind up killing themselves, and we don't care. But meanwhile, we're busy talking about how great they are. And in the same way, Starship Troopers constantly has this, this cult of patriotism, and loves its soldiers, and this very culture of service, and treats their soldiers as disposable cannon fodder.
Well, that's that's the bit I think is the most impressive. This is exactly that. Is that it does do that. Doesn't it? It sort of it has this moment where throughout that first couple of acts, there is this notion of lionizing, as you say, and raising up this militaristic idea, this thing of becoming a citizen. Like do your service, commit your time to becoming a citizen, whether it be in the space force, which you now have. Um,
God. God.
or in the infantry or whatever it is, but then you get the right to vote and all this other stuff. But then when they drop them on Clondathu, like it's like something out of World War I. It's
Oh
literally
yeah.
like over the trenches you go. Oh, you're going to get absolutely slaughtered, and then the response is, "Yeah, we made a mistake, but we're going to go trying something different." Not okay. We're really sorry. It was more sort of like when the Supreme General or whatever it is that he's doing sort of steps down. Like the way he does it, it's apology, but it's not apology for the loss of life. It's an apology to
Hmm.
sort of like, oh, I've let society down. Sorry, we're going to try something else now. Throw more people at it or something. It's an odd sort of like saying, it's almost like in order to become a citizen, you gain rights, but you for a period you lose yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I do have questions about like during the training. It seems like you can just walk away, right? Um,
Mm.
you could just go down washout lane, which is kind of a cliche from these military training movies. Um, but so that would seem to they're not trapped once they're in the military, and yet yeah, I mean, for me, once you hit that third act, and I mean, even like the training is good, the training starts getting brutal, but you still have a bit of silliness. There's like, all right, I'm gonna do a pattern B jump. Remember the football days. We're gonna do that. I mean, kind of like silly 90210 kind of elements there. But you're right. Suddenly you get to Clondathu, and one of the things that I love so much about it isn't just the brutality of that war and the depiction of how disposable everybody is, but one of the things that's so important, and I mean, and this means so much to me personally, is understanding that who lives or who dies in war is 99% chance.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been in combat will say this. You see your buddy next to you get hit in the head. I mean, storming Normandy. If you're going up Normandy Beach, as the Nazis are machine gunning you,
Yeah.
You're gonna die. There's no amount of skill if you're the first off the boat that's gonna save you. And who lives and who dies is luck. And the idea that like, oh, this guy's the best soldier, or all of this personal pride has to be stripped away by that, and you have to recognize in seeing that, no, even if you're the best soldier in the world, you're made of flesh, and if the bug happens to shoot you, you're done.
Yeah, well, I think, and that stands out in this film because I mean, this film creates like a crew. You have like a group of people that that's who's going to be there at the beginning. You get like Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards are almost, I would say, are safe throughout this film. Like they're going to be safe, but then you get other characters like Dina Mayer's Diz.
Mm-hmm.
You get Jake Busey, Neil Patrick Harris, Clancy Brown. You've got all these people sort of crop up, and they set up this sort of crew that you think, that's who we're going to follow through this film. That's who's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, for the most part, it is. But then, like you say, by that fourth act, like you say, people start to die that you're a bit like, oh, yeah, I didn't see that coming. That's not supposed to happen. Like Diz is clearly set up as his love interest, and there's been this love triangle between it. And I think more as I'm a bit more sort of older and probably a bit wiser now, like I see that the moment her and Rico sort of do connect, you sort of go, yeah, you're dead meat. Like that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, it's like the horror movie where the teenagers have sex and you're like, oh, you're gonna die.
Yeah. Seriously, but then when I watched this, when I was younger and watched this, and I was like, oh right, they've got together, that's great. And then she gets killed, and you're like, oh, all right, well she's dead. And then they obviously bring back Michael Ironside, like I say, it's his character, and then he's killed, but no, he's injured, and then Rico kills him because that's what he's supposed to do.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, wait a minute, who am I supposed to follow now? Like I don't know. Like, because by the end of the film, the big finale is that they go into the caves to save Denise Richards' character and some of the dude, and they've got this thing called the brain bug. But the people that go in is Casper Van Dien and just some people.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're in it now, and like you say, it's almost like whoever's next to you is the person that's important. Like they're the ones that are going to come with you.
Yeah, but I really love that. I mean, to this day, I mean, I find, two things that you talked about that, I really love. I think the way Dizzy is killed, it's still heartbreaking to me. It's like, and I mean, one thing I don't like is that he apparently has sex with Carmen once, kind of off screen before he goes into the military, and he really does it for her. And then he has sex with Dizzy once, and it's like, I have the dick of death,
Yeah.
That kind of irritates me. But, seeing Dizzy just impaled in slow motion by a random attack, is just, I mean, the randomness of it, it really drives home for me, even though, as you say, being older now, we know, this is coming. It really drives home that point of sort of how violent and random this is, and that there's no glory. And the way Michael Ironside's character dies, I mean, there's a little bit of, the Paul Verhoeven RoboCop kind of cliche, like, permission to die, sort of like, Rico, you know what you gotta do. Kind of over the top stuff. But, it sets up I mean, I love at the end seeing Rico. It's like Rico's Roughnecks, and he's parodying. You want to live forever, which is
Yeah.
such a great line, and he having joined up for a girl, knowing the military does not care about infantry. Botched completely. Military intelligence botched the whole Clendathu operation. Nonetheless, he has become that soldier, and
Yes.
he had his mentor, and he has become. I love that whole business with the new troops coming in, and they say we're the old guys.
Yeah.
I just think it's brilliant. And so you have these deaths that are surprising, and you're right. It's just sort of feels like it's going off the rails, but by the end, all of that stuff drives home for me the things that I really love about this movie.
I agree, because I do think it's that sort of, like you say, that no one in this film, because they're bugs, no one in this film is like killed by an identified enemy. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
in some of the films, you'd have sort of like, oh yeah, there's the sniper, and you sort of they'll set up a villain, and they'll set even in films like Saving Private Ryan or other films, there's always that sort of, there'll be a moment where you have like an identified human nemesis for even a part. Like I even think of the part in Saving Private Ryan where they're pinned down by a sniper, and that they're running around. Like that sniper is sort of like he's their enemy. Sort of like you get to see him in the tower and stuff, and it becomes like a purposeful thing. In this, like they are just bugs. Like yes, you get slightly different versions of the bugs, and you got the brain bug, and you get their military infantry bug, but like there is no, oh yeah, it's that one. There's nothing where they go, oh, that's the bug there with specific markings that's going to come back later,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
that nemesis showdown. No, there's none of that. It's just sort of like, no, there's just a wave of them, and it's sort of, I just find that really interesting that like they don't care. There is no emotion involved in this. There's nothing personal. It's just, you are the enemy, and I'm going to destroy you.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on something that is, I mean, that's a great point about, it's not, usually you see, even in movies where like you're facing off against sharks, it's like, there's that one with the strange markings that you're going to see again, right? Just to
That's it.
give you this adversary. But, the idea of the faceless enemy, um, we were talking about Star Wars before we started the show, and you think about the stormtroopers as kind of quintessential faceless enemies,
Mm,
and they're human, but you're taught not to care about them, right? You're taught they're
yeah.
disposable and they're horrible shots,
Mm.
and obviously all of those movies, I mean, same thing with like, G.I. Joe. I mean, where you have faceless or Cobra officers. I mean, all of these franchises, and even, in real life, like, Black Hawk Down, you
Mm.
watch that movie and, it's like, oh, well, they're not white. We're just going to gun down like 400 people with machine guns,
Yeah.
and they don't care. They're just going to keep charging us, and you think, that can't be right,
Yeah.
we're sort of trained by these movies, which are which are ultimately fascist in the training that they're giving us, to objectify the other, right? To objectify
Yes.
the enemy. And so here's a movie that has the ultimate objectification of the enemy, where not they're insects, right? Um, that hence it's easy to have the kids stopping on the cockroaches, right? And as you say, outside of that brain bug at the end, there really is there's no personality to these insects. There's no anything. It is the easiest opponent to objectify, um,
Mm.
and I think that especially when Buenos Aires is destroyed, I feel a sense of, yeah, the only good bug is a dead bug. Screw them.
Mm.
I feel that well up inside me, that post 9/11, like, let's get them. Let's burn some shit to the ground, right? I feel
Yeah.
that. And that's a human response. And so the movie kind of sets up the bugs, the enemy, as the ultimate sort of faceless other. But by the end, you realize, oh, wait a minute, the bugs have a society. They have a brain
Yeah.
bug, right? And
Yeah.
the humans are the human infantry might have faces, but they are just as disposable. And
Mm.
we're kind of, we're kind of the bad guys here, or at least there are no good guys. It really takes that whole faceless enemy dynamic and turns it on its head for me.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about this is exactly that you say that there's no good guy in this. Like, yes, your protagonists are human, and that's who you're following. But I say when they drop the information about why this thing has happened, you find out that a bunch of colonists have gone off and tried to set up a base or a home on, I think it's on Clandathu. Is it on Clandathu?
Oh,
Or at
it's
least a
near
planet.
Clandathu. They're like intruding on the bug territory,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and so they were wiped out, and then so that's sort of like that's setting them up as saying, okay, well they're the enemy, sort of like we tried to set up a colony there, and they killed all these people, and then you sort of go, okay, so what they're doing is they're defending their territory. Then I'm still not entirely sure that they're wrong, but they're more basic than this, and like you say, so then you sort of think, is the attack on I can't remember what instigates the attack on Buenos Aires or on Earth that causes the thing on Buenos Aires. But it always feels a bit like Vietnam, doesn't it? Like you say, it's that thing of like, oh, okay, well, I understand why this bit's happened, but it doesn't feel like it's fully propelled by good intentions. Do you know what I mean? Or even
Uh,
say America in Afghanistan, or even like the British going far back as like the British in South Africa and all that sort of stuff. It's
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean it's problematic, and I think that I mean I've got a few problems with the film, and one of them is that like I love seeing the dead Mormon missionaries in that TV sequence or computer sequence, but one of my problems with the film is that you don't get a sense of like how many planets have we colonized, and when you see
yeah,
you see like a chart of the Milky Way, and you're like, Clendathy's on the other end of the Milky Way.
yeah,
Have we colonized the whole of our galaxy basically? And we're now in like we in Starship Troopers in this film seem to have colonized a greater percentage of the galaxy than the Federation has in Next Generation, and yet you have no sense of that, right?
yeah,
At all. But so I think that's a weakness of the film. But yeah, that's kind of like drips and drabs. Like you get more and more kind of hints, like, oh yeah, we're kind of dicks, and obviously
mm,
we vaporize bugs like crazy. It's hard to say who fired the first shot, but or if that even matters. But they're vaporizing bugs like crazy, and the bugs are they're defending. They're hurling asteroids, right?
mm,
Which is another thing that I love because despite the lack of depiction of a human space colony, that is absolutely responsible science fiction, right? Why should
mm,
I bother, sending a fleet to attack Earth? There are all these objects. Hook an ion drive onto them for almost
yeah.
no energy. You can hurl the planet demolishing asteroids at inhabited. It'll take a long time to arrive, but that's absolutely responsible sci-fi.
Yeah, and I like the fact that they are kept as almost like they've got a society, but they're always depicted as that sort of underdeveloped. To say underdeveloped sounds really cruel, but do you know what I mean? They are sort of like the to be underestimated at least, and it does make me think of sort of like every country that's tried to invade Afghanistan, whether it be Russia or America or even the British. Like again, it's that thing of like, well, they must be less than us because they live in a desert, and then you go and try and take them on. You go, oh no, they will happily defend themselves and keep us entrenched in there for years. And it feels, I think, isn't it, sort of they constantly refer to them as the bugs and say it's sort of that they're just animals, and killing them off is the best thing to do, and it's constantly sort of degrading them down to that lowest common denominator, so people sort of see them in that sense. Which again is a really interesting thing that when we sort of this film was coming up for us to talk about it, so I had to look online at reviews and some of the talking points around it. And as you say, when I first saw this film, I very much saw it as a sort of like, as a daft, fun action film, and it's it can be read that way, and you can enjoy it in that way. And as I've sort of grown and sort of understand it more as a satire and stuff, but there are people that really haven't got that. That really are sort of like railing against this film. They're sort of like, it's really stupid. I don't understand why those adverts are in it. I don't get why this is happening. I don't get why that's happening. Why does so and so die and all this other stuff? And you sort of think, ironically, I'm going to suggest that you're probably the people that this film is actually railing on. Because this is, this people. It's obviously a wider society in the future, because it's meant to be set 5,000 years in the future, whatever. It may be the fact that the supreme leader of this society says make Earth great again. I don't know, but there's definitely sort of like this film is poking fun at, I would suggest, those die-hard jingoistic Republicans, isn't it? That sort of like, but they're the ones that probably won't understand that they're the ones that are being poked fun at.
Yeah, that's quite possible. I mean, one of the most depressing things in life is for me is the extent to which other people, and including myself, I mean, I'm not free of it. I have a mammalian brain, but that people are fundamentally authoritarian. The way in which you put somebody in a suit, and people just respect authority. They'll kill for you, literally, in these psychological experiments. And it is really depressing when you think of like Rambo. That's not supposed to be a story about how war is awesome, and he's such a badass, people. I mean, these are the same people who, like, you watch RoboCop. I mean, RoboCop. You think, how can anyone watch RoboCop and think this is good? I mean, he's going through hell, right? He hates being RoboCop. This is not fun at all. And people are like, yeah, I want to be RoboCop. RoboCop's badass. No. There is this way in which all of these movies and all of these franchises kind of get almost inevitably dumbed down to their most fascist possibility, if you will, over time. And how, all of the original sort of nuance is lost.
Oh, and this franchise is no different, because this film's got several sequels, and including an animated sequel, and they all do that. Like even by the second film, all that nuance has gone, and it has just become like an action adventure in space. And like you say, it just becomes what the people thought the first one was. I mean, at least with RoboCop 2, they're trying for some of that sort of nuance, with the
oh yeah.
They try for it, but yeah, in the sequels to this film, they just don't. Like, it's ridiculous. Because I think there's so much in this film that sort of like the imagery of some of this as well. I mean, even the design, because in the original novel, the way that the soldiers are described is in sort of like battle suits, I think, sort of like in sort of heavy suits and stuff, and they've like drilled them down. Suits. Yeah. So they're in sort of, which understandably, like they said, we can't do that. I'm sure there'd be a budgetary restraint on that.
Sure.
But I also think there's no coincidence to me that these troopers in this have a very similar look to the colonial marines of Aliens.
Yes.
And to me, it's sort of it's that similar, and they all sort of harken back to that sort of like GI, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, that era of soldier. They sort of they always try and sort of bring it back to that sort of look. I think that sort of stripped down. The helmets always looks very similar, sort of like they'll sci-fi the design and stuff. But there's a very sort of clear image of when soldiering was best, I think, if that makes sense. Like there's this era of sort of the greatest generation, sort of like, sort of World War II, sort of probably the early 70s, late 60s. And I just find I just thought that was really interesting, that sort of that's the look they've gone for as well. They're very clean cut, they're not as they are now, carrying like masses of baggage around and huge belts with pouches on and that sort of stuff. It's like it's a very clean cut. They've got a couple of things and their gun,
Yeah.
and that's it.
But that's a very good observation. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that, and my initial response to that is that this is, Verhoeven is European. I've seen most of his. I forget, is he Dutch?
Dutch,
Um,
yes.
okay, and um, but this is an American film made primarily in these days for American audiences. The foreign
Mm.
percentage of the box office wasn't as big as it is today. Um, and I always think that, there is this odd way in which, I mean, even in the 90s, America has always been shockingly insecure for a global hegemonic powerhouse.
Mm.
I mean, in the 80s it was like Japan's buying us. We're not going
Yeah.
to Japan's going to own Washington DC in 5 years. We're always so insecure. But so despite having all this power, one of the things that I like about my country is the idea of forming a more perfect union and looking forward. And yet,
Mm.
we lionize World War II.
Mm.
In the same way that I mean, the Brits have their own lionization of Churchill and the Blitz and all of this. For us, it wasn't violence on the home front. I mean, there was no Buenos Aires, of World War II, but we're very conscious. I mean, even to the degree of lying about it, because we ignore how many Russians died fighting the Nazis. But we are very proud of that era. And, that is kind of the era in which, that was the war that took
Mm.
America from, you know, a a relevant country, but not one of the top 10 you had to worry about, to the global superpower that dominated everything.
Mm.
So for Americans, World War II is the classic war. It's the ultimate good war, right? We're up against
Yeah.
Nazis. I mean, there's no debating like, yeah, Saddam Hussein's kind of a bastard, but is it better without him or not? All of that ambiguity is gone, right? It's just Hitler and Japanese beheading soldiers on POWs on beaches. So I mean, I think that iconography is so wired into the American brain.
Mm. Oh, it's the same in Britain. I mean, we've definitely still got that. We still refer to it as sort of like the Blitz mentality. That sort of like you're supposed to club together and help each other out. And I've heard it recently, unfortunately, because of the situation we are in with our Conservative government and Brexit. We will still shout down Germany with a chance of 2 world wars and 1 World Cup.
God.
Because we think that raises us up. Just note that in 1918 and in 1945 we beat them, and then actually in 1966 we beat them in a football game. Not that we've had anything apparently since 1966, which is ludicrous and is one of the daftest things I think this country says. But it's the same thing. It's this sort of lionizing of like we were great at one point, but even by chanting that thing, what you're acknowledging is we used to be great, but now we're shit. Because there's clearly not something we can do now. I just find that it's a similar thing, I suppose.
Right. No, I think it is. And I mean, and I think that as America enters its sort of twilight period, as, we know, people can resist it, people can fight it, but we know, America's not going to have this level be the number one economy forever. In fact, we're already behind Europe if you consider the EU a single country, which I wish it would be. But we are sort of entering that period where we're watching the fall of empire. And I think Starship Troopers reflects that, and it reflects I don't know that it's a coincidence that it looks back on, sort of like these World War One and World War Two, just sort of tactics that are supposed to be the highlight of you said the greatest generation, right? I mean, what
Mm.
bullshit, that's a
Yeah.
marketing ploy for a book. you know I mean, and it's not to say that there wasn't great bravery, and that people didn't have a blitz mentality, as you say. People did their part here too. I mean, people didn't complain as they were shuffled off to fight and die, and now they surely would. um, that's not to say that everything was bad, but surely it's not that everything was good, and that these were people fighting and dying in the best ways and for the best reasons. There were a lot of mistakes. And so I think it's important to sort of deconstruct this lionization, this idea that, yeah, we were great then. Um, and
Well,
maybe we can't be again because we lionize the past.
well, I think yeah, and I think one of those things is sort of. I even go back to the end of the film. So, like I said, the end of the fact is that sort of they eventually catch a brain bug, and this goes back to that sort of insecurity. I think that Rico and his small cohort saves Denise Richards, and it's sort of like that's the hero story for them, and it's very it's very good. But then when they get out, they find that a brain bug has been captured, and it's actually been captured by Clancy Brown, who was formerly Johnny Rico's drill sergeant, and somehow got himself busted down to private so that he can be out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Which I actually think is quite a cool moment, because I think Clancy Brown's actually really good in this. But the thing is, it's that thing of like when they drag it out, and they drag out this brain bug, and you have Neil Patrick Harris is there, and he sort of puts his hand on it, and he declares to all the soldiers around, "It's afraid." And again, like, everybody cheers. It's like, yes! And all I could think of is, this is the same as like when, the bodies of sort of like Mussolini or Hitler or Colonel Gaddafi or, all those dictators and all those sort of leaders gets rolled out and gets a pummeling or whatever. It's that thing of a need to humiliate and defile the enemy, isn't it? To sort of, again, to belittle them, to bring them down, to show that they are scared of the might of this other military force, and in this case, sort of like the Earth Force or whatever. And again, this is one of those things that never occurred to me before until I watched it this time. I was like, that ending is actually really harrowing.
I agree. No, I mean it's painful. I love. I mean, it's painful knowing what you were about to say, sort of recalling this. It's afraid, and then he repeats it. It's afraid. And everybody cheers. This sense of, this is our victory in essence, is projecting our might and making, this brain bug who, is intelligent. It's a military strategist, and we're going to study this. This is a great advancement, but the bugs have a culture. But there's something just absolutely harrowing, absolutely horrific to me about cheering for its fear. We have made you feel fear and feel scared for your life.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah, it's that thing, and sort of, watching this now, it made me, weirdly, it brought back an image into my mind of a newspaper from way back when, to the early 2000s, when Afghanistan, everything was first invaded, and it just said on it was a couple of like the Chinook or whatever helicopters they are entering and blowing the fuck out of something, and it just says shock and awe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the phrase, wasn't it? It was this thing of like,
Yeah.
we are the most powerful military might on the face of the planet. And it wasn't just America. This was America and Britain and Canada and France and all these people. And it was like, shock and awe. We're basically going to go in and blow the crap out of them. And then within a couple of years, all of a sudden, shock and awe changes to hearts and minds.
Right. Yeah.
And
now that we've burned your village down, we'd like to offer you some goodies.
Yeah, it was watching this that really made me sort of think, like, this is the shock and awe of this. This is sort of like, the thousands of troops, the thousands of infantry, the intergalactic spaceships with cannons on and all that sort of stuff, and that's your shock and awe. But you are never going to get hearts and minds in this scenario. because they will always see the bugs as beneath them. No matter what they learn, they will always be beneath them. And it was just that, it just sort of, I just really quite vividly, just that newspaper front page, shock and awe. And I was like, that's what this film, to me, although it was depicting, I'm sure it was riffing on every war that's gone before it, sort of like, what they call it, Middle East, Gulf War One, and all this other sort of stuff, and the Falklands Islands and everything else. But it seems to me to be more relevant, as we've gone forwards.
Yeah, I kept thinking the same thing, and I kept thinking like, that the way in which I see this movie as kind of like a guide to recognizing fascism. Don't do these things, right? When you see, all of these little things, right? It's not just the big things of let's go to war and objectify the enemy. It's all of the little cultural things that lead up to that, that create a climate in which people's fears can be mobilized, I mean, look, we're in a world in which the Western countries and even non-Western countries are presently dealing with a rise of nationalism that is quite fascistic, openly so in most cases, and built on fear of immigrants and fear of the other, fear of invading hordes that will somehow change or contaminate our culture, who are supposedly not willing to work, who are, faceless others. And what's really scary to me is that many people hold these views while knowing Hispanics, knowing Muslims. They think, oh, well, they're not talking about my kid's football coach. They're talking about those other people, and then they come and arrest the football coach. And you think, well, I never thought voting for Trump would lead to this. What did you think, man? There's this disconnect in which people are able to, say things like, well, I believe that all life is sacred, and life in Afghanistan, a life in Afghanistan is worth as much as a life anywhere, and then turn on to the TV and say, yeah, carpet bomb the fucks, like,
yeah,
what's going on?
It's
That's that authoritarian impulse.
Well, it's the same in this country. I mean, there's, there are many sort of right-wing pundits in America that I'm well aware of, and in this country we've got some similar individuals. And there's an individual called Katie Hopkins who is one of the worst examples of this bullshit. But I saw her recently, tweet something that someone else had sort of retweeted and commented back to her, basically telling her to do one. But hers was sort of, it was basically sort of like having a go at someone else on Twitter about something declared about a rapper has recently declared that Britain is fundamentally racist, and I sort of tend to agree in sort of almost in a casual way we let it slide. But she sort of was like, well, it should be stop your moaning because it should be Britain for British people. And I was thinking, the ridiculousness of that statement in throughout history, and you're thinking, did India think India for Indian people when we marched in and conquered it? Did parts of Africa think Africa for African people when we basically went in and killed thousands of them? And then you go back even further and you sort of think, but we're not actually even British anymore because, we were populated by Vikings and Anglo-Saxons and Gauls and all this other mishmash of everything else that came before. So, do you know what? The lunacy of what you're saying is so ridiculous. It's sort of like, it's this weird notion. And it's the same with this, isn't it? I mean, granted, these are two very different species. It's the humans versus the bugs, but to give you that extreme, but it's exactly the same thing as like, that's how some of these people view other people, is that they are insects. And, we've seen it in the past. And if we are to learn the lessons of the past, just look at the Nazi and fascistic propaganda, the anti-Semitic propaganda of Nazi Germany or Italy, and that sort of part of how they describe the Jews and sort of the comments on them being rats and cockroaches and that sort of thing. It was all there.
Right, absolutely. I mean, that's a brilliant and vitally important point, right? I mean, that there is a history of saying they are rats, they are
Yeah,
animals, they are insects.
and
This
that's
is
what this is.
literalized in this movie, right? It's literalized, but at the same time, this movie does a good job of deconstructing that they're just
Yeah,
thoughtless
yeah,
bugs, right?
yeah, and that's so you could put any nominal, lesser country as an enemy in that point in history.
Mm-hmm.
You think of Britain and the British Empire going off and colonizing parts of Africa, or India, or parts of the Middle East. We had very, very similar thoughts about how those people then. The Zulu warriors. Um, it's funny when you watch things like the film Zulu now,
Mm-hmm.
of yes, a small band standing up against a that huge Zulu tribe, and you have sort of like Michael Caine sort of like don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes and all that, but then you sort of now have to question, but what were you doing there in the first place?
Right.
You were there to kill them and to colonize their land, so it becomes a difficult question, but it is that in this the bugs are representative, and you know I think
Well,
maybe this film needs to be revisited in that fashion, because I don't think people do view this film in that fashion anymore.
I think that's horrific to me to think that anyone is watching this and going rah rah rah, kick that bug ass. I mean, and you're supposed to feel that a little, but you're also supposed to understand that that's a problematic reaction, and I think that's so important when we talk about recognizing authoritarianism and recognizing fascism and building up a sort of antibodies to this thing, that you have to go through it and you have to recognize that yes, I have an authoritarian impulse. It is very easy, to think, hey, they look, a country that harbored the people who hit us on 9/11. Yeah, I'm not gonna shed many tears for people in that country, right? At the same time, most of them are not had no involvement in this. These are the dictators, who come in and force them to uh, hide women's hair and all of this sort of thing. By the way, they all sell porn the second the Taliban leave. There's no
Yeah.
real commitment to this. But they're being bossed around too, and I think that, I mean, the other thing, even more than all of that, I mean, the importance, this movie sort of trains you to feel that you can feel hostility and rah rah, but also understand, yeah, there's not an end to that. And part of that dynamic is sort of recognizing nobody cares how this war started, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's these odd bits of dialogue about these colonies encroaching on the bugs, but it doesn't really matter. There's no exploration of how it started, and there's no ending. And we get that final sequence that promises, we will keep fighting and we will win. And it almost, like the first time I saw it, I thought, well, first of all these characters are dead who weren't,
Yeah.
aren't supposed to be dead. I mean, the invasion of Clandathu, the Bugs' home planet, happens halfway through the movie, and then they retreat and never go back.
Yeah.
And so there's this promise, it almost feels like, yeah, when you mentioned that the drill sergeant has sort of captured the bug, that's happened off screen. And Rico has kind of basically abandoned his platoon and gone on this personal mission, and it's worked out. But he is not the hero of the final scene, and the final scene is then turns into being about it's afraid, right, which is horrifying, And then you get this military propaganda. And it's not at all clear that we're going to win. Right? It is
Yeah.
not at all clear that the army has any desire to win. Um, it seems as if it doesn't matter how the war started. It really doesn't matter whether the war finishes, and I don't think that they really want it to finish. It seems as
Well,
if the war is really a machine that,
yes.
it's a military industrial complex that just grinds these people up and society organizes around, but actually right and wrong or accomplishing anything is really secondary.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because one of the things that sort of like is abundantly clear from this film is it's a militaristic centered society. You know, to become a citizen, you have to go and do military service. And in order to do military service, well, you've got to do some sort of service. And in order to do service, you've almost got to have a war. So you're right. It's almost like this war comes along against the bugs. It's almost like for the those in charge. It's perfect. It's like, oh, okay, brilliant. More people, get them into, we can get them into doing service, and we can conscript them, or they'll sign up or do whatever, and we continue this sort of like to churn this meat grinder. But also we hang these benefits on it as well, that sort of says, well, if you do this, you get these benefits. You can go into politics, you can have children, you can vote, da da da. I just think that's the sort of the thing. Like, what happens in a society when there is no war?
Mm-hmm.
Because that sort of gets into this thing then, I suppose, of, well, are they then out there sort of like policing the colonies? Are they policing this wider expanse into space? And that's, I suppose, a different story that's never really covered. But I'd be interested to see what they do in what we consider sort of like, in quotation marks, peacetime.
Yeah, or if they're capable of having peacetime. I mean, it's, one would imagine that, I mean, first of all, societies, you could say, were created or maintained historically to wage war, right? I mean, tribes, you put a tribe together in part because, I mean, yes, there's economies of scale and, specification of tasks, but one of the central functions of society is to protect from the tribe over there, right?
Safety in numbers.
Right. And so when we look at modern nation states, it is amazing when you think about, if you count all of the attacks and skirmishes that really are wars. I mean, my country has had something like 100 in, just 200 years. I mean, and we don't even remember most of them. We have the shores of Tripoli. Well, we invaded Tripoli.
Yeah.
When was that? That's not part of a war. We don't even remember this. We don't even remember half of our armed conflicts. And I'm not suggesting that we're especially special in that respect, but that constantly feeding the machine is needed to, especially after World War II, maintain a standing military. And of course, my country's military is, the next 10, 12 countries combined. I don't think there's another country on the face of this planet that has 2 aircraft carriers, and we have 12.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just an absurd scale. And you look at the way that affects the entire economy, of military bases, of firms that provide weapons, that provide planes. And we end up fighting about, like, every time we fight about welfare, I say, translate that into fighter jets for me. We're fighting over, whether we should feed people, and the cost of feeding people is 1/10 of one fighter jet. Okay, bugger off, right? This is dumb. But, it seems to me that societies, and certainly the more fascistic the society, the more it requires sort of a constant war and a constant sort of enemy. And I don't know that this society on Earth in Starship Troopers, this government, could survive very long if it really had peace. This whole structure of who's a citizen and who's not, you would have to think would kind of start to fall apart.
Yeah, and it's clear that this is Robert Heinlein's sort of, they said, philosophy, and I haven't read the book. I've read sort of like bits and pieces on notes on it, but did he expand this universe beyond the single book, or is it just a one off?
To my knowledge, it's just a one-off.
Because it would be interesting that this is the kind of book that I think would be interesting if someone had that scope to do this as a series and sort of see how that society could sort of rise and fall and that sort of thing. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, apparently there isn't any sequel to the original novel. And I think that there's been some sort of like other media, like with comics and stuff, and animation, but I'm sure that they are all to one degree or another influenced by this film, which
Yeah.
has had obviously when you visualize Starship Troopers, you visualize this, and I'm sure that at some point they'll remake Starship Troopers and try to put I know like Starship Troopers 3, I'm talking about the sort of like direct to video sequels that are really bad, has the mechs in it, and I've seen those and I don't even remember them, honestly, the sequels, but I'm sure when they redo it they'll put the mechs in and it'll be a little more faithful to the novel.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they'd be brave enough to sort of to make the satire, or keep that satire, or would they, like say, or would they keep it faithful to the novel and just have it as a fascistic sort of future society? I don't know. I don't know who.
Yeah.
I don't know if Hollywood would be brave enough to do that these days. But yeah, so really we've sort of talked the hell out of Starship Troopers. Before we get there, so what's your final thoughts on Starship Troopers, and aiming at some of the listeners that this came out in '97, so over 20 years ago, to whether or not people should go back and watch the 1997 Starship Troopers.
Well, I have a list of things that I absolutely love about this movie. I think people should go back and see it because it does have some hokey elements. It does have some things like this. It does have. I mean, when the meteor that hits the asteroid that hits Buenos Aires, it just happens to be on a direct course for the ship. I mean, there's stuff like that you just think, oh god. But
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, I love the parody. I love the satire. I love the sort of future echoes of things that we have seen since then. I love that probably more than any other film, this depicts a sci-fi war in a realistic way. I love the brutality. I mean, once the war starts, it's so brutal, and I love seeing the ships being blasted from the surface of Klendathu, where they're falling apart and they're ripping into each other, and you're like, I'd never seen anything like this in Star Wars or Star Trek. It's just so brutal, and people are being ripped apart by the bugs, and war is ugly, and the aliens look alien. They're not just like guys with face paint. I love all of that. I love the even though it sort of starts as 90210, when they all go off into the service, they go into different divisions, and I love the sort of like high, and it starts to work really well. This sort of high-low narrative that Shakespeare uses, where you see like the pilots are sort of high, literally, right? I mean, they're privileged, and the infantry are disposable and going through a very different set of experiences. And you see the pilots smiling and running around and sort of playing as the infantry is just going through brutal hell. So I love that. I love that. I mean, I would say even more than most Judge Dredd comics, which is famous for being about somebody who's supposed to be the bad guy. This movie knows none of these people are good guys. There are no good guys and bad guys in this movie. And finally, I love how it goes off the narrative rails. How it's not it doesn't have the convenient twist that I often find annoying in film, where it's like, haha, surprise, you were in somebody's head all along, I have two identities. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. That's not a good twist. This movie has surprises, but they're legitimate surprises that make sense within the world, where characters just die and all the things that you think are going to happen don't happen, and you don't even have an end to the war. All of this is just challenging and delightful and so enjoyable, and sticks in my head. And if anyone mentions Starship Troopers, my first response is, "Oh, I love that movie." Let's talk about it. What about? Sorry to ramble on. What about you, Scott?
No, I'm the same. I mean, Arrow Video recently released a RoboCop special edition. Sort of loaded with all the special features and sort of several versions of the film and all that sort of stuff. And RoboCop gets all this praise for being this sort of like icon of the 80s, for both its satire of corporate America, but also for creating such an iconic sort of like, sci-fi character in RoboCop. And it gets raised up as this sort of film, and I think it's fantastic. I will talk RoboCop all day, but Verhoeven took that mentality and he applied it somewhere else, where sort of like he lampoons 80s yuppie culture and corporate America. In RoboCop, he takes it and applies it to that sort of jingoistic military notions in Starship Troopers. And I think he does it incredibly successfully. I think this film is a really good sort of satire and lampooning of that sort of, that, as you said, like that need for war. That constant need to have an enemy, to have another. And I think especially in the 90s, when really things, yes, we had the first Gulf War, but overall it was relatively peaceful and relatively quiet. There seems like there was a need to have another, this enemy. And I think he just nails it. And, we can talk all day about how this is a lampooning of American militaristic, intentions around the world, but it can just as easily be applied to British, in the same, earlier in the 20th century, late in the sort of 19th century. It's the same thing. It's cyclical. It's always the same way. And I just think, it's such a good way of looking at it. And people have just sort of written this off as a daft space action film. And I think that's a real shame. I also think I like the fact that, like you say, that sort of it sets you up to engage and to follow a group of people, and then just starts basically blasting them all over the place. I mean, we talked about Dizzy's death. Not only is it sort of like, it's not so much out of nowhere, but it happens at a sort of a brutal moment. Like, she dies ugly. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Yeah. Like, when she dies, like, it's not some sort of like Hollywood swooning moment of sort of like, my heart will go on shit. It's like, no, she is drenched in blood. She is scared. She's crying. Like, it, she does a good job of it. Like, this film doesn't pull its punches, and I think it's been misinterpreted for years and almost forgotten. I think people forget about this film at times, and I think that's a real shame. And I definitely think it should be revisited. I'll also say I watched this on Blu-ray, and it looks great. For 20 years on, like the special effects and stuff, like, yeah, there's some moments when it looks hokey and a bit iffy, but also there's some practical effects in this, and they're absolutely really, really good. So it still looks good, but I definitely think it's worth revisiting in a sort of with a new lens. I think is the best way to look at it.
Yeah, that's all very well said, Scott, as usual. I think this is one of my, when I make lists of my top 10 sci-fi films, this is usually in there. That's how much I love. I mean, RoboCop gets in there. I love RoboCop too, and I love Verhoeven. Even his late stuff like Swart Book, Black Book is really good. But I mean, I agree with you, and it breaks my heart that people sort of have forgotten this, or would see this as just a rah action movie.
Yeah, so I think we're both really in agreement with it. This film definitely needs to be seen. So, for viewers, we've talked about it. We didn't go into massive detail about the plot, mainly because the plot for the most part is irrelevant. It's just a really great film. Go and see it. Just check it out. You can probably pick this up on DVD or Blu-ray pretty cheap, or find it online somewhere. Just go give it a revisit and let us know what you think. Are we right with this film? Do you think we've misinterpreted it? Do you think we're miles off? Do you think this film is just a rah-rah action film? I'll be fascinated to find out what you think. So, contact us at PodTimeSpace and let us know. But what are we doing next? We are doing Primer. So next time, the next episode, we are doing Primer. Now, I will admit, I've never seen this, but I sort of know the concept. So this is one of yours, Julian. So time travel. We're going to be looking at time travel in really the next one.
Well, and also sort of low budget. I mean, sort of the opposite of. I mean, Starship Troopers had it was $100 million budget in '97, right? I mean, that's
big deal.
The equivalent. Yeah, it was a huge, and that was on the strength of Verhoeven. But Primer, very small, very very low budget. I mean, shot for something like $30,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're going to low budget, independent, and I assume independent sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Next, that's exciting. That's going to be a bit of change of course. So next time then, guys, we'll be talking Primer, which I'm assuming you'll be able to find on a number of streaming services and online. So if you want to watch it before we talk it, go out and find it, and we will be talking about that next episode. But Julian, thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Scott.
And
I always enjoy doing this, and I hope that people reach out and communicate with us and follow along, and hopefully go on the journey with us and watch these films.
Yes, because it's going to be interesting. I think when we sort of look back on this season, there's definitely some things I've learned. But in the meantime, thank you very much, and guys, we shall see you again soon.